Hi everyone. We are just having a few more people join us, but I will start slowly as people start connecting. Good afternoon, welcome. Thank you so much for joining the Employers and Social Mobility session of our Social Mobility Week this afternoon. My name is Eleanor. I'm COO at Sanctuary Graduates, and I'll be looking after you this afternoon and our panelists. So whilst we're just waiting for a few more people to join, I'll start us slowly. Thank you. We are in our second day of a really exciting week. And in today's session, we will get to hear what some of our clients have done to hire graduates from working class backgrounds and promote social mobility at their firms. Yesterday, we had an introduction to social mobility. If you do want any information about what happened yesterday, please get in touch with myself or Will Burks, and he will be able to send you the recording from yesterday. And tomorrow's Lunch and Learn will be about how universities support students from less privileged backgrounds. We'll be joined by the University of Liverpool, the University of Warwick, and the University of West London. And we'll be looking at the strategies and schemes that they are using to support their students from less privileged backgrounds. And then on Thursday, it will be our final Lunch and Learn session of the week, where we'll be focusing on students and social mobility. You will have the opportunity to hear from several students and recent graduates who are from less privileged backgrounds. And we will be joined by Aman from the BBC's Breaking Into the Elite documentary. If you've known Sanctuary Graduates for a while, you know that we talk about that documentary all the time. But I really recommend, if you haven't seen it, giving it a watch if it's still on iPlayer. So we've had lots of people join us, so I will move on just to tell you a little bit more about Sanctuary Graduates before we jump into the main part of the afternoon. So, who are Sanctuary Graduates? We are the graduate recruitment and diversity experts, and we can reach any student at any university, at all universities in the UK. As seen on the BBC, as I've mentioned. We're very proudly official partners of the Social Mobility Foundation. As I mentioned, we can reach any student at all UK universities. We're connected to 120 different universities and have direct digital access to over 2 million students from any degree and any demographic. So I would recommend getting in touch if you are looking to reach specific people or a whole range. Just a little bit more here about how we reach students at any university. So we can go through our academic department partners, our formal university careers relationships, our society networks, our widening participation cohort representatives, and of course we've got our own brand ambassadors and our own database of talent that we'd love to use to help you find what you need. We are experts in diversity. It is at the DNA, the heart of everything we do. We have the most diverse campus networks. We have diversity data across those networks. And we specialise in running diversity campaigns. It's something we do all the time. We also support students with widening participation schemes and give charitable donations to the Social Mobility Foundation and also widening participation schemes. We can offer you tailored solutions for every hiring need, whether it be just general graduate attraction, brand ambassador campaigns, screening and assessments, or graduate recruitment. We've really pivoted this year as well to be able to support with digital assessment centres. So if you're still scratching your head about how you're going to run a digital assessment centre this year, do reach out, because it's something that I spend most days doing. So just a little bit more then about the employers we support. You can see here a whole range of different industries, different sizes, and you know, we do a variety of different campaigns for them. So I'll switch back to my presentation just to remind you of some of the stuff that we're doing this week. And before we move on to our employer panel and I get them to introduce themselves, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context of why we're running these events. Myself, I have worked at Sanctuary Graduates now for almost 6 years. Prior to that, I was a school leaver with KPMG. Prior to that, grew up in a very small market town in Lincolnshire called Boston. I'm the daughter of a plumber, and social mobility is really important to me. I can remember when I first went to university, somebody, and I won't name the university, but somebody asked me at a party what school I went to, and I was very confused because I was like, I'm fairly sure you won't know Boston High School. I didn't quite understand why they were asking me the name of the school that I went to, and I think, you know, that made me realise very early on that the playing field isn't level, and that when I moved into a professional capacity, I would do anything I could to help level that. Social mobility. So in Britain's top jobs, you are 5 times more likely to have attended a private school than the general population. We did a great presentation yesterday, which just showed the difference between people who are in those top jobs, judges, bankers, doctors, and it's really, and even in media, it's really surprising to see that disparity, or shocking. A bit of recent research looking at trainees in law firms. Trainees from state schools who were first in their family to go to university were more likely than their peers to have top performance reviews. However, they were also less likely in their early careers to get there than their more affluent peers. So it shows that we do need to be pulling these really talented students through and getting them to the top. It really goes to show that the talented students from less privileged backgrounds are being underutilised, which is why social mobility in the early career space is so important. So we are just waiting for, I think we've got all our panel now. Let me just check on my screen. It looks like it, fab. So I would like to introduce today's panel. I'll let them introduce themselves and we'll go in order on the screen. So we could perhaps start with Janine.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm not sure if you can see me. I can't see anybody else. Okay, great. So thank you for having me today. Delighted to be here. So my role, I work at Goldman Sachs, which is one of the investment banks in the city. I've been with Goldman Sachs for 14.5 years, so a very long time. And it's interesting to see, quite frankly, the change and the way inclusion and diversity has become really front and center of how we do things, which is exciting. But my role is I manage all of our graduate recruiting across the EMEA region, and delighted to be here today and really hope it's interactive and would love to hear from all of you any questions that you have. In terms of my background a little bit more, I am from South Africa, in case you're wondering where my accent is from. I grew up and studied there, moved to London, as I said, about 14.5 years ago. So my whole London life has been a Goldman Sachs life as well. But most importantly, I think worth mentioning, I have 2 kids. I have a daughter and a son. So I'm seeing the world from both of their eyes, which is interesting as well. And as I say, delighted to be here and look forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks, Janine. Lauren?
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Hilliard from Schroders. I'm working in the early careers recruitment team. I'm very much excited to be here today talking about a really, really important issue and something that is definitely kind of, you know, a key focus for Schroders in terms of all aspects of diversity and inclusion and ensuring that we can be the most inclusive company that we can in terms of our attraction and our recruitment, but also about how we develop people once they're in and make them feel part of the team. So really looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks, Lauren. Jess?
Hi everyone, so my name's Jess. I work as a freelancer within the early careers or graduate recruitment space. I'm very fortunate to have worked with a wide range of organisations across different sectors, including working with Lauren at Schroders and Jennifer at JLL. My role as a freelancer is often advising businesses on how to ensure that they are recruiting the best talent that they can. And obviously diversity and particularly now social mobility plays an absolute key part of that. My background is that I'm a first generation attendee to university. I went to a state school and I feel very fortunate that throughout my career over the last scarily 17 years now, I've had a very strong theme of diversity recruitment across all of the organisations I've worked for. So hopefully can provide some insight from my perspective across the industries that I've worked in.
Thanks, Jess. And last but not least, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Howes and I work at JLL, which is Jones Lang LaSalle. I've been here for about 3 years now, so heading up their talent management function for the UK and Ireland. That includes the recruitment and development of all of our trainees, be they apprentices or graduates, but as well as the careers of employees across the whole time that they are with us. So it's about career development and personal development as well. In terms of my background, it's really interesting what you say actually about the statistics and how the focus on private school education impacts people's lives. And for me personally, I experienced that in that my father fought hard to get a job. No one in our family had ever been to university, got a job abroad so that with a bank, so that he could get private education for us because he felt so passionate about it. And it's really interesting now to me to see how that's flipping on its head about it's not that you need to fit in, it's what can we do as organisations and society to ensure that everyone gets that equal playing field, that equal step up, or even ensuring that we're providing additional support where needed to understand that difference in background and experience. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thanks, Jen. So you'll all be probably happy to hear that it's not going to be a death by PowerPoint. So I will stop sharing my screen and hopefully you can now see all our panelists. And what we're going to do is this is going to be a really interactive Q&A session. We have got a set of questions that we're going to ask all our panelists today, but please do send through on the Q&A function any questions that you've got. They'll get fed to me and I will ask the team and we'll go from there. But we'll perhaps start with Jess. And Jess, it would be great as you are, you have dealt with so many different businesses over the years. Perhaps you can start us off by telling us the changes you've noticed in employers' attitudes towards social mobility and recruitment in the last few years.
Yeah, there's definitely been a shift towards more of a focus on social mobility, but I think it has always been there throughout my career. It's just become more prevalent and more important. Why has that happened? I think it's twofold. When my generation went to university was supposed to be the great leveler and was supposed to improve social mobility. Back in the day, Tony Blair days, there was an aim to get over 50% of people into further education and higher education to ensure that there was social mobility. And we haven't really seen the positive impacts of that in professions, unfortunately. So I think it's taken a bit of time for us to realise that it isn't as straightforward as just getting people into university. And we're starting to see greater number of applications, more diverse people in all strands of diversity apply for our programs, but we're still seeing disproportionately low numbers of people from low socioeconomic backgrounds being hired. And we're wondering why that is. And therefore it's becoming more important for us to identify the obstacles in our process and to understand what we need to do to try and improve that situation alongside, both the gender diversity for some industries and also ethnic minority diversity as well.
Thanks, Jess, that's brilliant. So I'm going to give this chance for our other panelists to show off a little bit. And I'd love to know just a headline of what each of your companies are doing to improve social mobility as an organisation. And Lauren, could we start with you on that one?
Apologies. So can you just hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
great. So, I mean, there's things that we will be doing in the future that we're not doing now. I think there's lots of different organisations and support that you can get from across the industry. And I think events are great like this to help with that. But in terms of a few kind of headline figures that Schroders have been working on over the last, I'd say, year to 2 years, we can probably bucket them into the attraction, the assessment, and also some of the outreach and events that we do to really tackle social mobility and to really reach out to those demographics that we need to be reaching. So on the assessment side, we actually chose to take away our UCAS point requirement about a year ago now for our grad and intern programmes. Prior to that, we were using a contextualised recruitment tool to help consider applicants' grades in the context that they were achieved, because we know that you know, there isn't always that direct link between academic performance and the kind of performance that a student or a candidate will come in and bring to the workplace. So after using that, we actually thought, we're not seeing any data to kind of stand up and suggest that that is the case, that those with the best grades are doing the best work. And so we chose to completely remove that. And we will be doing some data analysis later on this year to see if that has made an impact to the numbers to the grads that we've offered roles to. On the assessment side, we've actually gone to a new supplier. So our previous supplier, we were using quite a traditional form of online testing in our process, and we were finding that there started to be, you know, evidence of some adverse impact among some of the groups that we were looking to attract. So we've gone to a new system. It's much more gamified, immersive, innovative, hopefully more fun from a candidate experience as well. And the objectivity within this has meant that we can take away the CVs until the very final stage. So our hiring managers are only seeing CVs at the very final stage at the assessment centre, which I think was quite a huge kind of behavioural change to kind of instill and get managers thinking, oh God, what am I going to do with that CV? But that's gone a lot better than we had thought. And then finally, around events, we do host a number of events throughout the year, working with some of our charity partnerships from a corporate responsibility perspective. Some of them are the Social Mobility Foundation, the Snowdon Trust, and InterUniversity. And we run a series of different events, attraction events throughout the year to help you know, fill those gaps and provide the opportunity to students from social mobility backgrounds that we're trying to target. So without taking too much time away from the other panelists, I'll probably stop there.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, and I know that we've been supporting you a lot over a lot of years to be supporting with your events and very many other things, and we know how well they resonate with students on campus, so how effective they are. Thank you for that. Jennifer, could you tell us a little bit more about what JLL have been doing?
Yeah, of course. So I think we've been undertaking some of those similar things. So it's about looking at the data that you're collecting. How do you ensure that students from those kind of backgrounds are you know, equally considered and not purely based on the impact of grades and that kind of thing. I think one of the interesting challenges we have is some of our industry qualification bodies and organisations kind of insist on certain levels of assessment and degree level passes and that kind of thing, which I think is holding us back. So we've been looking at other ways as well to ensure that we're able to complement that view. And one of the ways that we're doing it now is thinking about because where we offer up more apprenticeship pathways that are centrally funded, so we provide those apprenticeships to individuals who wouldn't ordinarily have easy access to the property sector in particular, but to complement that and the earlier stages of the pipeline of potential for the future, if you like, is thinking about students. And where we've ordinarily provided a lot of work experience to students is thinking about how have those students come to us? And it's usually because they know about JLL or they know someone in the industry and therefore have that sort of pre-step up. So in order to counteract some of that, we've created a work experience program that is, yes, okay, that will still happen, but let's commit to providing equal numbers of opportunities to students who don't come to us via that route, and ensure that we provide a program of work experience for them, initially face-to-face. Now last year that meant that we had to do it differently and get creative, but to ensure that they start to understand and experience, you know, working in an office, what it means, understand the language that we're using and understand the opportunities that are available to them, which has been really, really interesting. And also to insist on anyone that coming to us has receives the real living wage. So whether it's regarding internships, work experience, because ultimately we were finding that, or we strongly believe that individuals, you can't expect them to give up those opportunities for local paid work purely to come and see what it's like to work at JLL, for example. So that's been, sorry, classic. I'll pause there.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, no
they may not go away.
Thanks, Jen. I'll move over to Janine then, just while Jen's disappearing. Janine, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about what's been happening at Goldman Sachs.
Sure. I think some similar things to both Jennifer and what Lauren have mentioned. I think what's for us at Goldman, what's been interesting is we really only started tracking the data of this in the last few years. So we've only started asking the question on our application form 2 years ago. So before that, we had actually no idea how many students were even coming from these backgrounds, let alone what we could be doing to help them, get in the door. So I think we've had a lot of lessons learned recently, but I think the key thing for us, which has changed dramatically, is just awareness. So making sure that people in the firm are aware that this is something that we focused on. The statistics speak for themselves across the country in terms of how much support and focus this requires. But what's been tremendous has been the senior stakeholders and the leadership's focus on this. So I have, quite frankly, in my time, never seen as much momentum behind something as I'm seeing around this, which is exciting. Lots and lots of people across the firm coming forward and saying, I've heard we're doing stuff in the space, what can I do to help? Huge interest in becoming a mentor or being a part of a program, and just getting actively involved to get to know the students. I think similar to what Jennifer said around knowing who we are. So a lot of students maybe have never heard of Goldman Sachs, which is totally fine. But if they have heard of us, they might not know all the different opportunities that we offer. And also they may have nobody to even ask those questions. They may not know anybody who works in the city or has even got somebody who knows them who can work in the city. So I think we've definitely found that that networking piece, that professional networking piece is key for us, but also for the students to make sure that they feel confident in applying to Goldman. So I think the most important thing so far is to be able to talk about it, to acknowledge it, to showcase the brilliant students that we're finding. I think they're just energizing and resilient and quite extraordinary in terms of what they've managed to achieve from where they've come from. And I think, now it's about putting all of that into action and on a much bigger scales. We've tried things, we've piloted programs, we've done some things. We have our Student Possibilities program, which is really the first step in the door and a way to get equipped and ready and confident for our first spring internship program, which actually just wrapped up last week. But that's really one of the ways that we're getting students to actually experience us, to immerse themselves in the Goldman Sachs culture, virtual or otherwise. We still committed to it. And I think what's been great is just to see how well the students are doing and how well the firm is reacting to this new form of diversity. And I think true holistic inclusion in terms of how social mobility cuts across all of those different, it really intersects across all different forms of diversity. So great leadership, great focus from leadership, speaking about it, collecting the data, and in fact, just getting ourselves out there and getting to know the students. I think that's been key for us.
Thanks, Jean. And of course, the reason that we've picked our panelists today and invited them along is because you all either are currently in businesses or have been part of businesses that rank well in the Social Mobility Foundation's index. And we'll talk a little bit more, and we've discussed this a lot between ourselves, about how by applying to the index, it really helps with external validation and can help if anybody's having issues and know that they're going to get pushed back in the business. But we'll cover that a bit later. Now, Jennifer, Lauren, you have both entered the Social Mobility Index for a few years now, and it would be great if you've got any advice for those who are either entering for the first time or those who want to improve their standing, and any advice that you can give. If we could start with Jennifer.
Yes, of course. I'm going to try and ensure that no more deliveries arrive whilst I'm talking, but I can't promise. So I think for us, yes, we've been doing it for a few years. I think get started is sometimes the scariest but most important thing, because once you take part in it, you get a huge amount of feedback, and just doing the process makes you go through. You've got to do a whole load of data collection and find out exactly what it is that we're doing as an organisation. We're quite large, we've got multi-sites, there'll be different things happening, and I'm sure it's the same in a lot of organisations. So just finding out, what are you doing right now, where do we want to get to, and what steps, it just becomes that much easier. And then use that feedback going through the mobility index process can help you then target and think about what you're going to achieve next. And I think in terms of really building on that is maintaining that momentum. I found internally was involving the business in that process. That then means that we're holding ourselves accountable, promoting the fact that we're taking part, creates a brilliant business case for us to then really focus on what's important about changing the social mobility picture at work.
Brilliant, thanks, Jen. Lauren, any advice you can give?
Echoing a lot of what Jennifer has covered, I guess my word of advice would be to start early. The form that you're sent to fill in and all of the different outreach programs that you have, it's requiring quite a lot of data about what you do in that space. I would start as soon as you can. Can you hear me okay?
I'm sorry, yeah, I've just turned into a bit of a robot, and I was just checking with the team it wasn't just me.
I can try and dial in.
Yeah, Lauren, if you want to have a go at dialing in. Jen, maybe I could come back to you just while Lauren's doing that and talking about any external support that you can get to, or just really looking for wider support to help with your application.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we found that a lot of the data collection, without wanting to sound too boring about it, but it is understanding where you're at and therefore tracking and understanding if what you're doing has impact, right? So often getting external support, be it from the Lights Sanctuary grads, be it from other organisations, and I'd be more than happy to have chats with others after today if they're interested. But sharing what you're doing, learning from them, you can learn from other people taking part, obviously, in the index as well, and find out what are some of the practical solutions they are undertaking currently, and then really embedding that in the systems that you're using. We're using Workday, so how can we track who's come in to the organisation from those kinds of programs, and how can we best support them to ensure, because we do things like providing mentoring and so on, but we want to ensure that we're tracking the right people. However, accept the fact, regardless of what you want to achieve, may not be possible straight away, because this is a sensitive topic for people. They may not want to self-disclose the same way we've had to get over that with a lot of other D&I data that we've been working with. There's a period of time you need to go through around trust and understanding, I think, probably as an organisation as well.
Yeah, and the Social Mobility Foundation, I don't know if you've seen this, Jennifer, but have a fantastic toolkit, don't they, where it really gives advice about what questions to ask and how to ask them, so that people don't feel uncomfortable answering them.
Absolutely.
Fab. Lauren, we're going to give you another go. We're all going to go on mute, and hopefully that will work. So would you mind just telling us a little bit about any advice you've got?
Yeah, sure. Did you hear any of what I said, or shall I start again? No, okay. It's often the case with Zoom. It starts off well and then I have to end up dialing in. So I probably should have done that beforehand. Apologies. So yeah, my advice, we've entered it for a few years now. And I would say start early. It is quite a meaty piece of work for one person to do. So I would advise getting as many people around you as you possibly can to help with the data aspect of it. It's asking you quite a lot of data around, your people, where they're coming from, your process, your outreach, things like that. Is about 8 or 9 different sections. And as Jennifer said, it's worthwhile doing just to get the feedback that you get from Social Mobility Foundation afterwards. And it really just draws your attention to what you're doing well and what you could be doing more of. So I would say, perseverance. Perhaps don't expect to place within the first couple of entries that you do. We didn't, and we only placed for the first time last year. And I think that's through the fact that, when you first start becoming aware and accountable of these things and being more knowledgeable about what you can be doing as a business, you then build on that, and then obviously you reap the rewards of it. So yeah, I would say start early would be my advice. If you haven't got good data reporting systems in place, then definitely try and tweak those as much as you can. Get additional help within the team. But yeah, definitely worthwhile doing. And if you can get senior leadership buy-in, as I think we've sort of touched on briefly, then definitely do that, because you can then, write comms about it, get it out there that you're part of this, which then shows your commitment to the cause.
Well, thanks, Lauren. Janine, as someone or as a team that's slightly newer to the index, any advice you can give for anybody who really is starting this journey very new?
Yeah, we've been there, and we were debating whether to even throw our names in the hat last year. So I totally understand people being hesitant and thinking, well, I need to be doing more before we can even try. My advice is just give it a go. I think, there's no harm in trying. If anything, you'll learn from the feedback that you get, as mentioned. But I think what's also really important is the process itself. So it's almost like taking a bit of a stock take of, what do we currently even do? What data do we even have? What data do we need to figure out how we're going to start getting? What programs do we run and we don't know what that leads to? So I think it's almost a bit of like a cleansing session of like, okay, right, what do we do? What don't we do? What should we do? What data can we get? Don't we have? And all of that just kind of comes together in one nice like bundle that you submitted in. And I think the feedback you get is quite powerful. It's quite detailed, it's worthwhile, and that hopefully just sets you up for success going forward, and just to rethink again of, gosh, we do all of this work on one thing, but that doesn't really lead to anything. How could we work with different partners, different organizations? How could we figure out our data? What makes the most sense for us as an organization might be very different to what other companies are doing. So I would tell people to just go for it. You've got nothing to lose. You could even do it anonymously. So there's absolutely no shame in trying. And if anything, I think for the teams working on this, it's credentializing what you're doing and making it something that is measurable and impactful, and something that you can take back to the business and say, right, this is where we fell down. This is what we're actually doing really well, and we should continue with that, and hopefully taking steps in the right direction. So we've been through it. It's no small task. I think that's been underlined on the panel. It's a big effort. It's a lot of detail. So start with a good amount of time, definitely bigger than one person's doing, but I think it's worth it. I really do, if this is something that you're committed to improving and progressing.
Thanks, Janine. Yeah, the guidance out there as well is great. The Social Mobility Foundation really take time to give you advice about how to do each stage. As everybody's already mentioned, we're also able to support and give advice. And I think it's just, like you said, taking that time, really understanding it, going through it. And as you said, you can be anonymous as well. So if you don't think you're going to rank very well, it doesn't matter, because at least you've got something to build on in years to come. Now, I wanted to go back a little bit more to social mobility in itself, and thinking a little bit about the impact that COVID-19 has had on social mobility, and especially within recruitment. So perhaps, Jess, you could start us and just tell us what you've noticed, the impact that COVID-19 has had.
Yeah, so we see a lot in the news that COVID has a disproportionate effect on not only low socioeconomic groups, but actually also the age groups that we're predominantly recruiting, the under 24s. So we are very, very aware that these groups are generally impacted outside of the recruitment process. However, if there's one positive of COVID that I can take away from a recruitment perspective, is the shift that many recruiters have had to make from doing campus events, trawling up and down the country, going to careers fairs at universities, shifting that to a digital events basis that's much more open and accessible to anyone, has been, I think, one of the massive positives that will help graduate recruiters and early careers recruiters improve their social or the socioeconomic diversity for the future. I've been working with one organisation that had 128 universities represented at their digital events this year. In the past, they would have gone to less than 25 universities in a year. And by naturally reaching out to a wider range of universities, they are going to see a more diverse cohort that's coming from it. So although we are seeing that, you know, kind of more from a social perspective, that we've got to be very, very mindful of what is happening from a you know, kind of socioeconomic perspective across wider society, the digitalization of our careers events, the digitalization of our internship opportunities, that means they're much more accessible and much more open to people. There's a lot of positives to take from it, alongside with some things that we have to realize that we're going to impact certain groups disproportionately than others.
Absolutely, yeah. I mentioned earlier, we've been running a lot of digital assessment centres, and we're seeing a lot less people drop out. And a lot of the time it's because they, you know, in the past, they couldn't even afford to buy the train ticket to go and travel the other side of the country, or they had care commitments, or they had work commitments, and it just wasn't possible. Whereas now we're running assessment centres online, and they can come and join for that period of time without having to give up the rest of their day. And they're just as motivated as somebody who can just give up that time. So yeah, we've noticed that too. Janine, anything that you've noticed, or anything that COVID-19 has impacted how you're approaching things?
Yeah, definitely. I think pre-COVID, we were testing the waters a little bit of, should we do some things virtually? How do we even do it? What platforms are there? Like, will we know what we're doing? And then COVID-19 hit, and guess what? We had to like tear up the rule book and start again. And suddenly we were running internship programs, let alone assessment centers and events on Zoom. So we're now Zoom experts. And I think what's been, you know, similar to what Jessica said, I think what's been really valuable is the ability for us to not have to select which schools and which universities and which events we can physically get to. The team is a limited number of people that can't be in more than one place at the same time. So we've always had a struggle with firstly having to choose which schools to go to and which events, but also the kind of, I guess, the myth around where we recruit from. And people were always wondering, like, do I have to go to this university to get a job at Goldman Sachs? And as much as we said no, there was still that element of, you know, misunderstanding, I guess, or miscommunication potentially from our side. So I think what this really did was it just scrapped all of that. And we opened our virtual doors to everybody, which we've, you know, I think is really broadened our net. And I think it's the universities is one thing. So again, we saw tremendous diversity in how many different universities, students from different universities were signing up, one. Two, I think it's also the diversity of what degrees and subject choices and backgrounds of the people that were joining. Because if I put myself in the shoes of a 21-year-old young girl at university, the thought of going to a, I don't know, pretty scary looking building and a very fancy looking auditorium with very smart looking people would probably have been more than enough for me to just not even apply. But if I could zoom in from home and just listen in and maybe ask a question, I think that would be, you know, far less scary. So I think the type of students that are showing up to the events is also different, which is amazing. But also I think that ability to reach different people in a way that's quite human. So I think, you know, having Goldman Sachs representatives doing events from home, kids, pets, you name it, wandering around in the background, in a way I think has leveled us and humanized us a little bit more versus, as I say, these very fancy buildings and everybody looking and dressing in, you know, in a certain way. I think that's kind of also leveled the playing fields in a really inclusive way. So we will hopefully be back on campus in some way, shape or form, but we will not be leaving the Zoom world either. So I think in future state, I would, you know, be very positive around keeping a, you know, a school agnostic approach and keeping things very virtual and very inclusive and very open. So I think we've learned so much, and I take my hats off to all the students who've just been so resilient and so thoughtful and have managed to get through what is, you know, hopefully once in a lifetime, you know, really difficult time. They're missing out on being at university with their friends. They're missing out on that experience, and being able to still take the time to zoom into sessions like we've been running and other firms, do volunteer work. I mean, when you just read the stories and you understand what they've done and the resilience that they've shown, I mean, you can't teach that. And I think that that's been a really powerful lesson for us as an employer, to just see how extraordinary these students are and how much they've taken, you know, on their shoulders and come out on the other end. So we've been thoroughly impressed and just delighted to see, you know, so many different students being interested in who we are and what we can offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Lauren, I don't know if you have made any changes over at Schroders or anything that you've really noticed this year.
Yeah, I was just going to agree completely with Janine, and on the initial fear, and we all went into a bit of shell shock, I think, at the fact of we'd need to be going in and doing virtual assessment centres and virtual internships. Completely empathise with that. But I think, yeah, I see a lot of positives, like Jess said, getting out onto various different campuses is already a bit of a stretch, and we had already actually taken the approach of the brand ambassadors route in terms of reaching out to the target universities that we want to reach, and that's through Sanctuary graduates as well. And just kind of thinking back to, obviously a lot of their job is normally out on campus, speaking to students, standing up in lecture halls, shouting out about, the great opportunities that we have. And I was going to say a bit hesitant at first as to how they were actually going to do this, but they even adapted so well to the online virtual aspect of being able to do that promotion work for us. And I think from our perspective, we were again starting to put our foot in the waters as to see how the virtual world would, what opportunities we'd have virtually to do the events that we were already doing in person. And I think actually it's opened up a few more doors. We're kind of approaching things differently. We've ended up doing a few more online events, webinars, Q&As than we would have ordinarily, I think, just in terms of the restriction of getting out onto the campus or the schools. So yeah, there's more to come, I think, but so far I'm quite happy with how well we've adapted, and it sounds as though the industry have really adapted to the new virtual way of doing things. So yeah.
Thanks, Lauren. And Jen, what impact have you noticed, especially in the social mobility that COVID-19 has had?
Yeah, I think that I would echo everything that's been said. So without wanting to repeat it all, we've seen huge benefits to being able to reach more students, more across the border reach, across the whole of the country. I think one of the things we've become aware of, and maybe it's something that whilst we're really excited about doing, because we, similar as Janine mentioned, I don't think we'd want to move away from the impact of having face-to-face work experience and a combination of the two. And we've been building these experiences, virtual experiences, be it using Zoom or some sort of platform where they are doing work and getting assessed, as well as being able to ask Q&A and so on, which makes it extremely experiential without them, having the benefit of being on site. One thing we came aware of is continuing to ask ourselves some of the key questions around social mobility. So whilst we still want to reach out to schools and universities and parents to get these the right individuals in that might not have been aware, how do we ensure that we're not creating further barriers by assuming that we're reaching more people and therefore we're doing our job? So, will all of those individuals that we want to reach have the laptops and so on to be able to dial in, and how do we cope with that? Will they be able to, how do we continue to instead of dropping programs or stop doing them and or paying, the benefit of paying them the real living wage, how do we continue to do that, as well as ensuring we create or take the benefits from the last year? So with people being able to access people that ordinarily, as was already mentioned, I think wouldn't have been able to afford the travel fare potentially to come to one of our offices for that experience or that event, say.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about today about how we've all had so much more access to people because of this year. But somebody's come in with a great question actually on the Q&A function, and this isn't just towards you, Jen, so I won't put you on the spot. Anybody can take this. But how have you found, or do you find that online assessment and recorded video interviews especially affect recruitment of socially disadvantaged students? Has anybody seen that? I mean,
I would just jump in on that one. The one comment I would have, I think, is that that would have always been, well, I say always, we've been doing digital interviewing for a while, so perhaps it feels like that way. But I think where it's a general comment that students from socially distanced disadvantaged backgrounds potentially will not be so experienced or might feel more uncomfortable in any of these environments, be it coming into corporate, be it doing an interview. So I think the same things that we were doing previously, doing, you know, employability type training, reaching out to schools, reaching out to universities, should absolutely still be happening, but perhaps it's thinking about tweaking that so that it incorporates some of this virtual world that we're now experiencing more of.
And I would just add to that is that, you know, kind of video interviews in itself is a broad range of assessments. And I have seen organizations implement things like video interviews and see the diversity of their recruits absolutely transform in a positive way because of the efficiencies it allows them to see more candidates at an interview rather than relying on previous experiences and the information that you see on a CV. On the flip side, I've seen organizations implement video interviewing purely for an efficiency process and to cut down man hours. And all it's doing is bringing kind of an interview process earlier in the stages. But the questions that they're asking are still favoring certain candidates, or the expectations of the answers are favoring certain candidates. So I wouldn't necessarily deem it a platform as such. You have to look much more at the intrinsic detail of why you're using that platform, what you're asking, and how you're assessing it, because two different, the same platform can produce two very different outcomes based on that. So that would be my general advice or guidance on that one.
Definitely, and there's so much guidance out there about how you can actually prepare students prior to things. So, you know, how are you setting up these video interviews? Are you putting them on the spot and not allowing them to re-record? You know, if they have a technical difficulty, are they then stuck? And therefore, you know, does that mean that people who don't have strong internet because of their background are therefore not being successful? And I think, you know, if I could give any guidance, going out and looking at the stuff the Social Mobility Foundation puts out around there is fantastic. We're also doing a session actually in a few weeks' time, which is going to be on how to create a solid Social Mobility Foundation index application. And so you might find that some of the stuff that we cover in there is really useful. But I want to go on, we've had a question from the audience about how you balance social mobility with hiring for the quality that competitive sectors like yours require. So how do you balance both really high quality and also building in that social mobility factor?
I can jump in on this one, and I would just kind of initially question, you know, are they low quality if they are coming from a low social mobility background? Because a lot of the time we find that the talent, if they're just given the opportunity, and even though if they might be from a more disadvantaged background or a working class background, doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't got the talent. They just may need that little bit more help preparing their applications, making sure their CV is as, you know, accurate and shining a light on their experiences and, you know, qualifications and things that they can bring to the team. So I think it probably needs to start a little bit earlier in terms of the information that we're giving about what to expect in the process. We need to be transparent with all candidates, but particularly those from, you know, those social backgrounds where they potentially haven't had the work experience in a corporate environment, to get them up to speed as some of the candidates that may be coming along that have come from, you know, a family member that has worked in the financial services industry and has got them 3 work experience placements prior to coming along to one of our assessment centres, for example. So yeah, I think it needs to start a little bit earlier in terms of us equipping them and giving them a head start to do well. But absolutely, they've still got the talent to bring into an organisation.
Thanks, Lauren. And yourself or anybody on the panel, has anybody put in place any particular solutions in terms of access to technology for disadvantaged students? Has anybody got anything that they've put in place to help disadvantaged students when it comes with technology?
I wouldn't say, no, sorry, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say, from an internship perspective, when we ran our virtual internship program last year, we actually did a survey to see where everybody was, what access to technology and Wi-Fi they had. We had students, you know, doing the program from Ghana and from Nigeria and Rwanda and all these places where some of them needed electricity. I mean, it wasn't even down to like how, you know, the Wi-Fi. So really we went into the detail and shipped and sent and organized a myriad of things just to make sure that at least from a baseline level, everybody had what they needed. Of course, it came with complications, and of course not everything worked on the first day. And, you know, we're not saying it was perfect, but the intention was there. And I think it's important that we also recognize this is, you know, all new for us, and we always ask for feedback from them, like what could we have done differently, or how could we have made this, you know, a slightly easier situation for you. We also really just tried to humanize it. So as I said, you know, some people didn't have their own room to zoom in all day, and there were people walking behind them, or, you know, could they have put headphones on so that there was less background noise. We were just very empathetic towards the situation, and I think we can just be human about it and continue to ask the students for feedback of what we could and should be doing differently. And we really are open to taking that on board. So we did go down that road. It's not a straightforward one. But to answer the question just before, just to add as well, I think quality and background shouldn't be kind of, you know, one doesn't equal the other. I think in terms of social mobility, none of us are saying we're lowering the bar because somebody came from, you know, a disadvantaged background. In fact, quite the opposite. I think sometimes they've done more in their backgrounds with what they've been, you know, the opportunity set that they've been given. I do think as well, to what Lauren said, is the very big difference we've seen is that network. So not being able to get that work experience, not being able to have the opportunity to have, you know, connections or a family network enable you to get a few names on your CV that, you know, people like us would recognize. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we can kind of, what is the story? You know, what is the student's background? Where have they come from? What have they done? And really using that so they're not getting kind of eliminated at that first hurdle. Because I think when we're all dealing with the volumes we deal with, it is quite easy sometimes to just eliminate a CV based on, you know, the superficial list of what they've done in their spare time. And actually, I spoke to a student a couple of weeks ago. She said, well, I've got nothing to put on my CV. I haven't done any of these fancy work programs that I know other people applying have. And when we dug into a little bit, I mean, she had like been helping care for her younger sibling and was dropping off a parent, you know, helping care for a parent and leaving school early to help with something else. And I'm like, you've got so much that you can be putting on your CV. You just have to find a way that we can articulate that in the right way. So I think we also all need to be more open-minded as to what experience really means, and it doesn't have to be corporate. I think its life experience is equally valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. My CV before I went to university was working in a bar, and that was it. And it was a golf club, so it was also the shop, and it wasn't a fancy golf club at all. So Jennifer, I think you wanted to jump in there a little bit as well.
Oh, I think we tried some similar things, although not as international as Janine is having to experience. But yeah, that was our approach basically, is ask and find out what was needed and provide that that option to ensure that everyone had a level playing field where possible, and accepting that last year has been very different to how we might find things going forward, hopefully. I think we would still plan to do some of that because, you know, in the future, maybe they're not having to share rooms with siblings, but maybe they are, you know, it depends on the background and their personal situation. So I think we need to be open to that. And I think we will get more streamlined in how we're set up to do it, hopefully. But the aim was to really make no assumptions and to ask them and get feedback and continue to improve on that as we go forward.
Thank you. We've got loads of questions coming in, so great topic of discussion, but I will move us on slightly and to a question that's close to my heart. So are there ways that you're looking to help the London versus the rest of the country divide in terms of your graduate recruitment?
Oh, I'll jump in because we just announced this week that we're opening a Birmingham office. So we are definitely focused on expanding our remit. I think having had only a London office previously, there was a little bit of a challenge because not everybody wants to work and live in London. So we're really excited about our opportunity to broaden that. But I think from a school perspective and outreach perspective, we've always been very committed to making sure that we get to a broader range as possible. But I think coming back to the earlier point, that's somehow easier now being able to do that virtually. But we are, you know, obviously it's easier. We can walk to LSE from where our building is. UCL and others are much closer, but that doesn't mean they get any preferential treatment, or we definitely don't want that to be a reason why people think they should choose a university over another. We're very open-minded.
Thank you. Anybody else got any thoughts about wider country pieces? No, that's, oh, Jennifer, are you going to jump in there? No?
No, I was considering, and then I thought, actually, well, I guess we are, the issue we have is that, yes, we have offices throughout the country, and I say country, the United Kingdom, but the issue then becomes is how do you get that sense of everything happens in London versus, even though we know we've got a great new office in Manchester that we've just moved a load of people into, and, you know, state of the art and you know, living our values around sustainability and all sorts of things. But so it's really, I think, though, ensuring that, you know, when you're coming to do development, when you're coming to do some of these sessions, they don't all happen in London. Just thinking more, which now doing things virtually does become easier, but I do think it could be very easy to slip back into some of that way of thinking once we're all back in the office for sort of at least 50% of the time or 30% of our time. That could happen again. So just making sure that we proactively think twice about how we do some of this.
Absolutely, thank you. So we've got 5 minutes. I've got 2 questions that are coming up quite often. I'll start with getting buy-in from senior members of staff and getting them really on board. And any questions, any answers there?
My advice.
Oh, sorry.
My advice would be to ensure you've got the data to back up your thinking. There's one, you're going to have internal data to support your processes, but there's also a lot of external data out there, whether it's through the Social Mobility Foundation, whether it's through other charity organisations or organisations like the Social Mobility Commission. Data and evidence has always been the way that I've managed to get buy-in from senior people to say, this is where we are and this is where everyone else is. We need to get to this standard and to this level. So that would always be my advice.
And Lauren, did you have?
I was going to say exactly the same thing. Data, and back up your decisions with the data. And I think it's about being kind of transparent on the reasoning, and, you know, almost saying, you know, we could treat this as a pilot, see how it goes. Doesn't have to be how we always do it. It's trial and error, but if it does work, great. And if it doesn't, let's reassess what we've kind of brought to the table and see how we can tweak it.
Thanks, Lauren. And just as we're closing, I know that we've had a couple of questions come in about what questions to ask during the application process and how you position those. And so just from the Sanctuary Graduates point of view, and I know that it's very similar across the board, we ask questions along the lines of, you know, whether a student had free school meals, whether they're first generation to go to university, and also whether they went to what kind of school they went to, state, private, so on and so forth. My recommendation would be that you go to the Social Mobility Foundation website, and they've got a toolkit all about what questions to ask and how you ask those questions. And I think that's a brilliant way to be able to present something to the team that you know is backed up by them. But I don't know if there's any final closing comments from our panelists about any of the questions they ask or where they'd get advice from.
I agree with you, Elle, that the Social Mobility Foundation is a great resource. Also, the Social Mobility Commission has a toolkit as well, and also gives you some stats to benchmark against as well. So I'd recommend both of those websites.
Thank you, Lauren. And were you going to jump in there?
I was just going to say that we just started to add into we added 3 questions in on a social mobility basis into our application process a few months ago, very, very recently. I think the questions we went for, there was one around caregiving, so whether they were giving care during their education. Sorry, I can't remember these completely to the letter of the word, but the second one was around first to go to university, and then the third one was around parent's occupation, I believe. But again, we'll reassess if those questions are working for us, and that's across our experience hire and also our early careers. That's, you know, anyone that gets asked a question during their application process, they'll have to complete those questions.
Thank you, Lauren. I am going to close this there, and there's so much more to talk about. I'd really recommend, if you haven't already, going back and watching our recording from yesterday. We've got some great advice there about these things. Also going into tomorrow and Thursday, and as I said, our index I'll talk about the index in a few weeks' time. But I will close there. Thank you so much for our panelists and for everybody who joined us and brought us brilliant questions. And have a lovely sunny afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone.